Great to see you guys, and thank you so much for the engagement last week. Presenting can be hard. It's definitely hard online. So your engagement and just an exchange in energy is very appreciated, and I'm glad to hear that folks had good experiences last week. So as Jennifer mentioned, we're going to go over the parts of the training we didn't get to, and then whatever time is left, we can do Q&A. Not to say, though, that you aren't invited to jump in as we did last week. As you have comments or questions, I think just folks hearing from other people and the examples you guys gave is really helpful. So please feel free to jump in as you did last week. Maria is not gracing us with her baby this go around, so we'll do our best to make it through without any baby love. But
Okay.
What was that, Jose? And then Jennifer, you could just help with muting as needed. So we'll get started that way. In case it gets juicy like last time, we'll make sure we have enough time. Where we got to last time, we got into this effective mentoring portion. So this portion of the training was really intended to sort of get into the implementation of the earlier topics we covered, although I think we did a great job through you guys' ideas and comments of integrating, right, how we implement what we're learning throughout. So we had stopped on this slide that the three keys to effective mentoring, and we had gotten through the developmental portion, right? Just talking about being developmental versus prescriptive, right? So that's us providing space for folks to learn rather than giving them answers. And we talked about how important it is to really, again, create that space so that they can ask questions. And again, us asking questions gives them more opportunity to learn and grow rather than, again, just get answers. So we talked about the boundary piece. Of course, that was a huge piece for us. And I look forward, after we finish up, perhaps we can spend a little more time on that if you guys have thoughts and questions. But from there, we were going to get into number two of the three keys to effective mentoring, and that's being trauma informed and culturally sensitive. Jeez. Okay, coming off of a holiday weekend, it's a struggle right now. So on the culturally sensitive part, and again, you guys had great conversation last week. So we talked about, what does that mean and how does that apply? But just want to point out that cultural sensitivity, or responsiveness, as I like to call it, isn't about race. We know that folks of color are not a monolith, right? And we talked about that last week as well. So thinking about culture is important, and challenging ourselves to think about culture is important, because we can easily start to group folks in based on what they look like, and that doesn't necessarily align with their cultural realities, right? So generally speaking, I think we all generally know, right, that culturally sensitive is always about being thoughtful, that we have similarities and we have differences, and that we don't label them, right, as positive or negative or better or worse, right or wrong. They're just differences, and we should account for that in how we show up to the space. So we're not going to go into details about what that looks like. I highly encourage you to look into trainings that are available for specific cultures or races and ethnicities, religions, what have you, just to help yourself be aware. But as we talked about last week, showing up, acknowledging you're not an expert and asking for folks to give you support and ensuring that you're showing up to them properly goes a long way. So just a little quick sort of explanation of where bias comes from. I found this really cool. It's a visual. I didn't include it in the slides because it was just too much, but it was developed by Bobby Harrow, and it kind of talked about where biases come from and how do we liberate ourselves. And so, I think it's important for us to really think about how do we get to the point where when we see a person who looks a certain way or talks a certain way or walks a certain way, how do we get to the point where we automatically assume things about them, right? So, I mean, obviously we're born into this world where biases already exist, and there are systems in place that help manage those truths, if you will, the truth about things and people. And I do say truth with air quotes, right? We're given that truth by our parents, our teachers, and others all along life, right? So you think about when you went to school, whatever you were taught, which I think many of us have seen, and those of us who are of the minority population know that not everything we were taught in school was actually accurate, right? So we were taught all of these things, and we were taught by people who we love and trust, right? So they became truth. They became our beliefs, our norms, and our expectations about what is. And then, of course, over time, those things are reinforced as we grow older. If you think about, what do you see on the news? What do you hear in songs? And so that sort of plants this seed in a conscious and subconscious way, right? Where if what we're constantly seeing is a certain race or ethnicity being presented only in a certain way, right? Then we start to assume that that must be who they are and what that truth is, right? And so again, that reinforcement just happens every day. And no matter how big of a heart you have or how committed you are to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're all subject to this reality of, again, this uncontrollable, especially now with social media, is like all this content just hitting us all the time. And so whether we realize it or not, these things are being reinforced, right? So because we believe those things, and this is where it gets challenging, then we tend to kind of lock down into what we believe to be true. And then we ignore anything that doesn't align with that truth, because it doesn't feel right. I don't know if you guys have heard the term cognitive dissonance, but it's like this funky feeling you feel when you believe something over here, but when you see and hear things that conflict with that, it kind of causes this rub within ourselves. And so we have a choice that we can make in that moment. And so when we choose to ignore that feeling or ignore things that may challenge what we think we know to be true, then ultimately what we're doing is reinforcing that bias, right? So on the flip side, then how do we liberate ourselves, right? So obviously we encounter information we already talked about, and it can be cause discomfort or be uncomfortable, right? So this training might be an example, even in some of the content and comments we had last week, specifically on cultural realities, right? Maybe someone heard something that they didn't know, or it seems to conflict with what they had heard before, right? So we have a choice in that moment, again, where we can either lean into that or not, right? So if we're going to liberate ourselves from bias, we have to make the choice to lean into that discomfort, lean into that moment where what we thought we knew about a certain group of people or about a certain topic might not be true, and then be willing to engage in opportunities to learn more, right? And then we take action to address the behavior that aligns with that, ideally. And then we expand those actions, right? By speaking up, speaking out. And I think we've seen with the social justice movement that continues, we've seen what this can look like. So just to kind of give a baseline of what that looks like. And I think this is important for us to know, and it's important for us to communicate this to mentors, because what we know, and I'm so thankful to have had an opportunity to work with so many mentors over the years. There's never a shortage of good intentions and big hearts, right? But sometimes folks show up so excited to help that there are blind spots. So it's really important that we are thoughtful about how we support mentors in being able to be willing, right, to lean into this discomfort and challenge themselves on what they know. So I'm going to pause right there, give you guys a chance to chime in so we can get it as conversational as we had last time. What do you think about bias in your space? How's it showing up for you? Have you seen it show up maybe with mentors you work with? And or what shifts should we be making, or should you be making, to maybe address if you see some areas for needed improvement?
Sorry, someone else.
No, that's okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know we see some assumptions and biases show up with mentors, who are just learning about our program that might make some assumptions about youth who live at or below the poverty line. There's this assumption that parents aren't present or parents aren't, that they, and part of our orientation is really to talk about, when we talk about the mentor's role, and a parental supplement or replacement is certainly not it. But we really have to actively tell mentors, no, our members have wonderful families who work hard to support them. And so I know that that's one assumption that comes in a lot. It has to do certainly with the socioeconomic level that a lot of our members are at.
Yeah, that's a good one. That actually aligns with the trauma content we covered last week as well, right? To just assume that because folks are struggling with something, that means that, they're not going to do well in school, or that they can't handle a certain responsibility, or that they're sort of assigned to a lesser opportunity in their career later in life, or what have you. So that's a good one, Tricia. Thanks for sharing. Maria, what were you going to share?
I was going to add, it's basically the same, but more into the culture. Having mentors predominantly white, it gives it the bias of like thinking that our population here in our clubhouses is basically 80% Latino. And so having white mentors with Latino community and families, it just gives the impression that, yeah, they are, like we were saying, the economic, all that part, like, I think gives it less perspective of, I don't know how to explain it, but you understand. It's just culturally, and just having mentors that are predominantly white understand, they just don't speak English, they don't know what this is, that things like that. So
yeah, and I think it also sort of enforces the assumption that folks, in that case, that folks who are Caucasian, right, don't have any problems, don't struggle with poverty, don't need mentors because they have all the answers. Because when you come to spaces like this, you often see that those are the folks helping. So it really shows on both ends of the spectrum as it relates to the different populations represented. Thanks, Maria. Galen, were you going to say something? Okay.
And it looks like we have a hand up from Mai.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Mai.
Hi. Yeah, I think for one of mine is kind of like what Maria and Trisha shared. We have a lot of youth of color here, and a lot of our mentors who are able to mentor are predominantly white, but we shifted to more like mentors of color. And even having mentors of color, there's still misunderstanding because of different life experiences and what they bring into the space. But one of the things that we tackled right away that we learned from the biases from our mentors with our members is part of our orientation, like not orientation, part of our interview process. So what I would do is I would invite mentors to come see the space in action to see if they can vibe with the energy, because it's so fast paced. The youth are like moving and doing different projects, and that really is a tell of like a mentor can last or a mentor cannot last in our space. And that's how we decide, like, okay, you'll be a good fit mentor or you won't be, because they can see it in action and seeing who's using the space, what's happening. And then, we have teen employees here as well. And they kind of engage and talk with them briefly with me present, and then just kind of see like, okay, here are my perspectives, here are some biases that, I might have. And then I sit and talk with them. Like, these are the youth we serve. This is what may happen, but they can be the total opposite from this. And then also, if I do, once they get into the mentoring program, then I offer bi-monthly youth development topic under various different topics. So like, focus on like youth homelessness or young parenting or critical mentoring, things like that, just kind of help them in having those one-on-one or group conversation with the mentors it's helpful for them to understand their own bias and to be able to engage with youth.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I love those strategy. I think that the vibe piece is everything, right? Because it's one thing to hear about those little poor kids, right? And then there's being in the space with them and whether or not you're vibing or you're intimidated or whatnot. I do want to focus in on a word you shared that reminded me of something really important that I think we often miss when we talk about bias and cultural responsiveness and all that good stuff is the word lifestyle. And it goes back to the slide, right? So I say, like, let's not assume that culture doesn't mean race. Culture means a lot of different things. It's alignment in lifestyle and beliefs and different things. And so going back to this idea that we're not a monolith, I think we can also make assumptions that if we, for example, see a person of color, that they wouldn't have any bias, or if we're a person of color, that we don't have bias, or if we're with someone who looks like us, that we then know them, right? And so I think that's another piece we have to really pay attention to is that, again, it's not about the look, right? Because we're not a monolith. So we can have folks who have totally different lifestyles, totally different upbringings, totally different religions, totally different belief systems who look similar, right? And so when we show up making assumptions based on what we see, we can miss it in different and not so obvious ways because we think we got that because we know them because they look like us. And we all are at risk to do that. I would also argue that we need to think about the fact that even when we're aware of bias, and this is the power of having those reinforced messages always coming across the screen and the phone at us, is that even when we are aware of said bias, said stereotypes, and it's even about us, people who look like us, we can ourselves, if we're honest, have those same assumptions. So whether you're a female, right, and when you see other women, you make assumptions about their abilities or their skill sets or intelligence, right? Because we always get these messages that women aren't smart or women can't drive or whatever. Or if you're, for example, for me, an African-American, what thoughts cross my mind when I see a young Black man walking across the street? If I'm honest, do I have the same reactions at times that folks who don't look like me or that Black boy have? Like, so just being willing to challenge yourself to look in the mirror, as woke as you might say you are, right? We always have room to grow, and just really going deeper. If this is a topic where you kind of feel like you know that you still have room to grow and check in all the time, right? Because this is ongoing work. There's no finish line, right, to showing up without bias, because it's just something that's inherent within the human behavior that we tend to try to figure things out before we have all the details. Like, that's just what we do, right? So just making sure, even when we're, again, woke and really progressive in this way, that we don't miss out on the opportunity to check in on our own opportunities to grow. Anything else on that one before we move on to the next piece on trauma-informed approaches? All right, thanks for your feedback. All right, so on the trauma-informed part, and we obviously spent a lot of time talking about what trauma is last week, is really about avoiding re-traumatization, right? So the first step in that is the realize part, right? And that's just what we already went through. Realize that trauma is a thing, or negative, impactful life experiences. We kicked around that word impactful versus traumatic, because even the word trauma has some assumptions laced in it that aren't always helpful, right? And then recognizing those signs. We also talked about what can it look like when a person is struggling with unaddressed, impactful life experiences, right? So then once we are paying attention to that, those two things alone, right, allow us to just be more thoughtful. And it allows us to show up with this question, that's on the PowerPoint. What's wrong with you versus what happened to you? And that's really critical that we know that, and we help our mentors know that, because as we saw last week, some of the behaviors that are really signs and symptoms of a traumatic experience that hasn't been fully processed look like bad kid, look like ADHD, look like all these other things that we can label folks as. And it ultimately, when we don't respond properly, we ultimately are punishing youth and their families for their symptoms. So that would be like you getting in trouble for the fact that you're sneezing and blowing your nose from your cold, right? I mean, that's the equivalent of it when you think about a non-trauma informed approach. We're punishing, right, for a symptom to do with something that we're dealing with. So when we put it like that, I think it can take us a long way in really checking in. And again, I think if you just remind yourself and others to shift into this, what happened to you, what have you been through, what might be other experiences that have nothing to do with this moment that are impacting the way you show up and act the way you're acting right now, and help me understand that, will get us really far into trauma-informed approaches and what that really means, right? So then that's the response part, and that's in our behavior. That's also in the policies we have, and I know you guys are super trauma-informed in a lot the way in which you do your work. So obviously for mentors, making sure that they are aware of that too. And then of course, how we respond is how we resist, right? The re-traumatization. And we're going to get into some examples of what this looks like before we leave today. But that's just sort of the super summary of how trauma-informed and not re-traumatizing, what that really means. So yes, love that analogy, Jennifer. I just think, I don't know, for you guys, what do you think? If you explain that from a medical perspective, right? That if you're being punished for a symptom, for a cold, or for some sort of diagnosis that you have, like that's literally what we're doing when we miss the mark on folks. Anybody else thoughts on that?
That really resonates for me too, because, when you think about the cold or a flu, I think everyone agrees that's not something you can control. And if you wish for your well-being, then it's not something you would wish upon yourself. And the same is true for traumatic or these kind of impactful experiences that we're talking about. It's not something that young people have asked for or, they have control over, but then they have the symptoms which are more visible to the world.
Absolutely. So in the next slide, get my mouse to act right. Here's just some tips on avoiding re-traumatization. I actually have 2 slides on it because there's a lot of things to consider. Of course, be consistent. And that's really one of the big things with mentoring, right? And the importance of mentors understanding why consistency is important. For a lot of trauma survivors, abandonment is at the core of where at least one of their traumas lie, right? So to know that I'm not going to be left and aborted and abandoned without support and without warning and all of that is everything. So when we don't show back up, when we said we'd be here 6 months and we were only here 4, when there were only 2 sessions left and we didn't come back, we are definitely, more than likely, I'll say, re-traumatizing the folks we're working with, because that right there is abandonment, right? So that's why it's so important that we, when we're working with mentors, make sure that they're aware of the commitment and that they understand what it means when we don't show up, right? Another suggestion, facilitate predictability, avoiding significant or unexpected changes as much as possible. And when you do have to make a change, please, please, please give notice. And how this shows up and how this kind of ties to potential triggers. And what we mean by trigger is something that is an incident today that reminds me of something that happened before. So that's what a trigger is, right? So when we're avoiding re-traumatization, we're saying we want to avoid behaviors and approaches that cause something in this person's mind and thinking to go back to tying that to a negative experience they've had in the past. So again, another root for a lot of folks' trauma is not having control. So especially children. If you think about children, there's very little choice they have. We tell them when to get up, we tell them what they can eat, we tell them where they're going to go to school. They don't get to choose where they're going to live, right? So there's already inherently not a lot of control when you're a kid, right? But when you have trauma, whether it's abuse or neglect or what have you, you have even more situations in which control was not something that you were afforded, right? So anytime there feels like there's not control, it can just be triggering, reminding of something else. So as much as we can, the structure is important, and just giving fair warning. If we always do this thing at the beginning of our time together, and we're not going to do that this week, let them know as soon as you can. If we've always done it this way, but there's a new policy coming and we're going to start doing it a different way, letting them know well before you make the shift, not the day of, right? Just to give them an opportunity to make the adjustment and sort of, reacclimate themselves. Providing choice and voice is another one, empowering them and really reminding them that they have power. Again, for a trauma situation, there isn't power in choice, because obviously if someone had choice, they'd be opting out of whatever that experience was. So the more we can give them options, and this can be the smallest thing. Would you rather start with this activity or this activity, for example, right? It doesn't have to be anything major, but just giving choice and voice counters, again, that feeling of, and the often true lack of choice and voice that they had and or still have, depending on what situation they're in, especially when you think about poverty. Maria, you brought that up, right? Every day, poverty's still there. So not getting a choice in where we live or how much we have or don't have. So opportunities to choose are everything. Another suggestion is just being non-judgmental. Seems obvious, but sometimes we don't realize we're being judgmental, right? So when we go through traumatic experiences, depending on how it goes down and whether or not people are aware of it, there can be an experience of criticism from others externally, or there can just be internal criticism that you never know that a youth is feeling like it's their fault that they're in poverty, or their fault that their parent is struggling with addiction, or whatever the case is, or even their fault that they ended up responding in a way that got them in trouble. And yes, that was a problematic response, but it was also part of their trauma. And so there's a lot of criticism that goes on with folks who are struggling with trauma and haven't had an opportunity to truly heal. So just making sure we're not judgmental, not just about what happened to them, how they responded to it, watching how we respond. I know you guys said last week that you've gained a lot of trust with folks. So when they tell you the thing, how your face shows up is everything, because whether you say, oh, okay, well, no matter what, I still care about you. If your face said something else, right, they're going to know that, right? So, and then making sure we don't project our thoughts and emotions about their experience onto them, whether it's making assumptions about what we think they should have done or how bad we think it is. And that's to both ends. We can project the assumption that an experience wasn't that hard. We could also project the assumption that it was that hard, and maybe somebody had an experience, and for them, it didn't show up as true trauma, in that they were able to really be resilient in that moment. So we want to make sure we're not assuming that they're struggling, right? Just because if we were to go through that, or maybe we did go through that, and we would have fallen apart. A couple of other suggestions for avoiding re-traumatization, and that's really identifying and avoiding triggers, which we've kind of already started to talk about, but also helping the youth and even adults, right, be able to do the same thing. So kind of looking for patterns. If you pay attention and you're truly connected, right, you can notice that every time it gets loud, this kid seems to just really start to struggle. Or every time we're about to end activities for the day, this kid really starts to struggle. So just kind of paying attention to see if you can pick up on patterns of maybe what is causing them to feel discomfort or dysregulated. And if you can start to see it, maybe you start to ask them and partner with them and trying to figure out if they can pick up on the pattern. Because once we can identify a pattern, then we can support them in being able, even for themselves, to say, oh, you know what? I tend to get anxious anytime we're about to end for the day. And then we can work on what are things that they can do, knowing that every day, right, that we do programming, there's going to be an end. Or every time we're in a mentoring session, that's going to end. Well, what can we do to mitigate that and sort of prevent getting ourselves to the point where, or allowing that emotional buildup to get to the point where it's causing them that discomfort. Another one is just not forcing any action or demanding that they do things. And this is one I think we have to really watch, because especially when we're adults who are, watching out for the kids, so they're all, running around the space or doing whatever they're doing. And of course, we have our ideas on what's responsible behavior and what's bothersome behavior. And if we're not careful, we can get into asking them to stop doing something that really helps regulate them. So it might be that they're fidgeting, right? And it's distracting everyone else. But if we keep telling them to stop, and that's the thing that kind of helps them be calm in the moment, but you don't know that, then we literally are taking away the thing they figure out to kind of help them get through moments. So we got to really watch and see if we can pick up on what's going on behind it. Sometimes it's just that they're doing the most, right? But sometimes there's something behind that, and we want to be thoughtful that we're not taking away something that works for them. In that case, if it is something that works for them, but it is disruptive, then we can work with them over time to try to explain and help them understand why sometimes that might not be helpful, and help them figure out what could they be doing instead. Because when we just say stop, then we have taken away the support and the coping mechanism they're using, but we haven't given them something else to use instead. So, and just forcing that sudden stop, quit doing that, or just sudden jolt in and of itself, the approach itself could be traumatizing. And then lastly, just always do your best to remain calm. And this is a note, and I note this later, but we have to make sure we've dealt with our trauma in a way where we aren't off kilter or dysregulated, because it's really hard to remain calm and be consistent in our behavior if we got some funky stuff that we're still dealing with. So want to pause and just give you guys an opportunity to ask questions or give feedback on examples of how trauma might be showing up in your space, or ways in which you think you could be helpful. Did any of those examples resonate where you might have a youth you're working with that has some stuff, and maybe figuring out how you help them to identify that pattern? Or maybe, if we're honest, maybe there were times that we told them to sit down and be quiet, and maybe that wasn't helpful.
Yeah, this is my this is with trauma, but also I felt it's also a combination between learning disability and behaviors. We usually don't allow like parents or adults into our spaces because we really want to keep it to teen focus. However, we did have a youth who at first we were trying to engage, and it was kind of hard, and it would have some setbacks and or emotional outbursts, and we wouldn't know how to handle it. And we were a little bit confused, and then the parent came and said, okay, well, this is how I'm working with the youth, their child. And we said, okay, but then we felt like it was very directive, like, you do this at this time, you do. And we were like, okay, well, this is very different from our creative space. But then we realized that the engagement process and the productivity of the youth being in the space was a lot better. So then, for that youth who do come, we encourage the parent to stay, because we're like, we don't have the skill or the knowledge to be able to engage with the youth, but also ask like to have the parent be there, but not have youth do projects for them, the parent. So to kind of like balance that, it's like the youth is here for the youth itself, because you know how to engage with your child, where we don't have the skill set, but we want your child to be in this space. So that was something that we've learned in experience, and that was, we've experienced a lot of different encounters with different youth as well, especially with that. What we challenge the most is that welcome space. When they come into our space, the library doesn't check for like IDs, identification, or any of that stuff, but we do. Our program is like special. You have to sign up to be a member. You have to do this. and it's a little bit of a barrier, and we acknowledge that, and we know that has its purpose, but we know that that causes trauma a lot, like asking like how old you are, do you have anybody we can talk to verify age verification is really hard for us. So that's something that we acknowledge that will cause harm, and we try to be more open and figuring out ways to allow that. So it's just not like show us an ID because you know some teens are like, we don't show ID because I don't have it, or lots of different reasons.
Yeah, and I think too, sometimes you can't get away from the rules and structure you have to give. So always when you can at least explain to folks why you have to do it this way or why you are doing it this way, that can go a long way so that at least you feel acknowledged, right? And and I think we owe youth that anyway, no matter what it is, to just give them, because old school, some of us are older than others. I'm only 21, but I've heard, no, I'm just kidding. Some of the old school folks, and I might be one of them, come from a day and age where we were raised that you do what adults say do, and that's what it is, right? You don't ask questions, and the youth don't deserve an explanation, but that's certainly not a trauma-informed approach, and it's not a human-informed approach, right? So they deserve to be told why. They deserve to have an opportunity to share their thoughts on it. Even if we can't respond, it goes a long way to just be able to give them an opportunity to know why and express themselves, even if, again, we still have to do it the way we were doing it.
Yeah, I mean, and we explain that because it's a special program and things like that. But then the other, okay, sorry, this might be going out of it, but the other issue we have is that when they get frustrated and they don't want to come to our space because of that barrier, then they take it out at our colleagues in a different space. And how do we mitigate that from happening, and then having our colleagues re-traumatizing them in a situation that they have no connection with?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes there's only so much you can do, right? But if there is an opportunity to process with them, if you do get to a point where unfortunately you're not going to be able to move forward for said reason, that at least that they can process it. Now, sometimes the processing happens later, because it's if right now in this moment today on September 7th, right, we have to have the conversation that this is a rule and that's not working for you, and so now you're not feeling it or you're not coming back or whatever. Sometimes a lot of times that's not the time to be explaining, because if I'm triggered and I'm angry, I can't even hear you anyway, right, in real life. So sometimes it's about trying to figure out another in. And I know sometimes you're not going to see them for a while, but if there is a way where you can connect with them after they've had an opportunity to kind of come down, or if I don't know how you all are set up. So if folks are aware, at least in your staff, that someone was there and opted out, and there's a way when they see them later that they can acknowledge them, and maybe they're in a better space to be able to hear that. But sometimes it just, that's one of those boundary things where we have to know that we're not going to always have it go the way we would hope. And we got to be okay with that sometimes and hope that overall it works out. But thanks for sharing that. Trisha, were you going to add something to that?
Maybe I guess this is sort of the other side of it, is that I think the nature of the programming at the clubhouse is that, it's open-ended, it's led by youth. There's no grades to be given. There's no, requirement that you sit here or stand there. It's a really open-ended and flexible space where members come and go at their leisure, so if they decide they've had enough today, that's okay. So I think one thing that interests me about this conversation is, what youth aren't we serving? Is our space not as inclusive as it could be? Because I'm thinking about that we don't really see a lot of like behavior challenges coming out in our members, because they're in that, they just have so much control in the space. So I'm just wondering, like, what are the barriers for some young people to be able to come and engage that, that we're not thinking about? I hope that's a complete thought.
No, it makes total sense to me. Jennifer, did you want to add anything to that? I saw you nodding your head.
No, it's Trisha, I just thought it was a good point. I hadn't really thought about it that way. And yeah, I feel like our spaces are really youth-led and youth-driven, at least that's the ideal. And, you know, I think there are youth who also appreciate more structure and more kind of direction and guidance. And so, yeah, it's a good thought of like, how can we balance it and how can we make sure that we're really engaging and serving both populations and interests.
Yeah, that's good. And with the mentoring, and you might not see it, maybe there might be other spaces where it shows up for them. So some of this is about insight you guys can use. Some of it's about that maybe the mentor would see more of it. Or if your mentor isn't an opportunity for advocacy, or you are, right, where you're talking to their teacher and they might see some of this stuff show up more. And if the teacher's not aware of these concepts and these strategies for avoiding re-traumatization, then it might not be on their radar. So it might just be that we become the sharer of this information for someone else, another adult that's in their life. Anybody else thoughts on avoiding re-traumatization? I know y'all got the holiday hangover today. I feel you. All right. So the last piece that we had in the 3 keys to mentoring was remembering where you are in the relationship journey, right? And I know you guys as employees are in the more in the long haul, but depends on what happens. You might see some flexibility here. What's on your slide is from, I believe this is the National Mentoring Partnerships framework on just sort of generally what the stages of mentoring are, starting with sort of that building and honeymoon type phase, then going into that testing phase. And then you kind of get into the real where now we've gotten past some of the struggles, and then transition. A couple of things to point out that I think is really important that I think folks forget, especially in a mentoring specific relationship, is that mentoring relationships are manufactured, right? So if you think about any other person you meet in the world, you casually meet them. You met them because you worked together and your paths crossed in the hallway one day. And if you had a vibe, then you talked more. If you didn't, you probably didn't talk unless you had to, right? Or if it's a friend, you ran into each other from a mutual friend, the good vibes were there, and so you chose to move forward. Mentoring prevents us from being able to naturally progress. And so I think because of that, I see that mentors forget, right, that this got manufactured. And so we didn't get the opportunity to do the vibe thing, right, where you kind of feel somebody out, and if it felt right, then you felt yourself talking to them more and more, and it naturally progressed into something. So I first want to just point out that it's important for us to remind mentors of that really important fact, because where else in your life have you been, unless you were a mentor as a mentee as a kid, where you just put with someone and then now you guys are going to hang out and they're going to be helpful to you, right? It ultimately can be a great thing, but we have to acknowledge there's some manufactured components there, right? And so why is that important to know is just that we really need to remember that it takes time, because sometimes I think mentors get so excited to jump in, right, and do their part and be helpful that they kind of jump ahead of what should be happening and when, right? So we should be willing to take our time. We should be willing to let it flow and not be measuring ourselves, right? Because as once we get into adulthood, we're all like measury, like we gotta like perform, right? So you forget this is just a relationship. There's no measuring. So because it's a structured mentoring relationship, then the mentor knows that you're going to ask them how they're doing with the relationship. And if they come back and say, well, we barely talk, then they don't want to be seen as the mentor who couldn't mentor well. And, so then you start forcing stuff. So I think for you guys, reminding your mentors, and for mentors to just know, take your time. It's okay. Yes, we check in, but that doesn't mean we're trying to push something to be present before it's ready, because that nobody's winning and there's no good outcome when we've tried to move along, right, to get to the part where you like me and I like you and you tell me your stuff and all of that. So that's just one big point that I want to point out here. The second one is in that stage 2 and reminding we need to know it. The mentors need to know it. And, kids can, kids keep it so real. It can be really hard when they're doing that testing stage, because, they might call you out your name, Xavier. They'd be like, that's why your mama is, and as grown as we say we are, let a kid talk a little crazy to us. And then next thing you know, we're triggered. And I don't know if if we got 10 toes down on the let's not re-traumatize. And then now we over here trying to protect ourselves, right? So, we have to really challenge ourselves to remember, without trauma, right? Kids just test to see, people test. Adults do that sometimes. You've been friends for a while, then they just throw a little thing out there to see what you're going to do, right? So without trauma background, we know that's a thing. But for kids who have a history of abandonment, let down, and other struggles, that becomes even more of a factor. So we gotta really make sure we don't personalize if they get into that testing stage, and we want to make sure we don't end up proving them right? Because if we let them test us to the point where we're like, he don't like me and I don't like him, I'm not going no more, then they did exactly what they were trying to do, trying to figure out whether or not you were going to be there when it got hard. And now they know. And unfortunately, when we have folks opt out on kids because of that, or even adults, right? We unfortunately have reaffirmed something in their mind as true that we would want them to believe that it's not true, that you're going to be abandoned when it gets hard. But when we don't keep our toes on the ground and we don't respond properly, that's what we end up doing. And I think Xavier might have a story. I might have to bring him off mute after these next couple points. But I ideally we get through the testing phase, and then we start to see what's really up, right? And then that closure piece. And remember, we said with the boundary piece that if we're doing this right, we've all along been clear on what this is and what it isn't. And that's not forever, even if we're going to work with them for a long time, so that that closure piece doesn't have to be so hard. And I'm going to get into a little bit more on timing in a minute, but I'm going to give Xavier a moment in case he wants to share. I feel like he got stories. Or he's like, I don't want y'all to know this story. Come off mute if you'd like to share, Xavier.
I'm good. I'm just really observant today. As you're speaking, I'm thinking about all my other clients I've had in my time. So if I had to do one briefly, what's PG-13 that I can say? I had one client, his first weeks there. I used to work at a 24-hour residential facility. So I had a client, first week there, he was trying to get to know people. So I was also new. So he thought if I mess with the guards or mess with the people there, then I get my beef up. So he's coming at me crazy saying SND, yeah, I should know what SND is, and all this other kind of violent stuff. He was looking to laugh, and I'm like, oh, you laughing at me, bro? 6 months later, he's defending my honor. And when somebody's trying to attack me, he's telling other young people about me. So they're all behind me. So just being consistent and just being really cool. I mean, yes, we had to reprimand him, but having that conversation yo, bro, what's up? You don't know me, I don't know you. Normal people say hello. This bothered me. This didn't bother me. What's up? Let's try this. And so just being able to give them a space to fail and trying to be the same person every time. It's always one of those you're gonna try because they're always gonna test you. And because they're younger than you, it's oh, so you think you bad. So it's one of those that is set in front of yourself. But it's been definitely learned. So that was my quick ramble. I'm gonna go back on mute.
Thank you for sharing. And I think that's important too. You said giving them permission to fail, but giving ourselves permission to fail. Because if one of our toes does come off the ground and we only now have 9 toes down, right? That we make sure that we revisit them to say, you know what, my bad. I was really, I ain't gonna lie, because I'm a whole human. It really hurt my feelings when you called me a B the other day. And so I snapped back a little bit, and I want to own that. I try not to be that person, but I definitely allow my feelings to get the best of me. So, because we're not going to always get it right, but the next best thing is to own it when we don't get it right. So I think that's a good point. Anybody else on just sort of some of this? And matter of fact, before I give an opportunity for that, I do want to share this with you. Are you guys familiar with the Search Institute's developmental relationship framework, which is on your screen? Look at Maria. And if you're not, it's okay. But I do recommend that you get familiar. It's a really nice framework that really just helps us to think about what behaviors and actions and definitions are helpful within a mentoring relationship or relationship building in general. And we're going to use this for the rest of our time together. But I'm pointing this out because when I came across it back as Director of Mentor Central Ohio and was doing and developing some of this trauma-informed approaches, what I noticed is that while I love this framework and I think it's very helpful, it is not presented in the context of order. And so we're going to get into that, and I'm going to show you my thoughts on this in the next slide. But I would argue that there are certain things that would be great in a mentoring relationship or a relationship with the youth, but not right now, right? Because depending on where we are in the relationship, it might not be time for that. So on this slide here is my adaptation. And again, this is my perspective with the expertise and experience I have on mentoring and trauma-informed approaches as to how we would apply those 5 areas of focus for a relationship framework to actually mentoring in a trauma-informed and a culturally sensitive approach. So if I go back again, we had express care, challenge growth, provide support, share power, expand possibilities. Again, this was just given to us without any specific thoughts on timing. So when we go here, if you notice, I don't have challenge growth as the second thing. So I put this in sort of a Gantt chart so you can see everything to do with express care for the most part is happening all throughout the relationship, right? Because we want to be dependable and listen day one. We don't need to get to know each other well to be good listeners and know that being dependable is critical. Now, believing in me, being warm and encouraging, you might say that's from day one. But there are times where being too warm and acting too friendly can come off like you're not authentic. So that's why I push that one a little further back, because we got to be thoughtful about that, right? And if you don't know me and we just met 2 weeks ago and you're all super encouraging, I might not be feeling the fact that you got all these encouraging words for me. So I put that one, again, a little further out. Now, obviously, respect me and include me. I don't need to know you long to know that respecting you and including you would be a great idea. Now, on the other 2 in share power, collaborating and letting me lead, I don't even know if we've gotten to the point where that's even a conversation yet. So I pushed that one back into the testing and challenging phase. And again, this is not exact science. This is just me trying to offer some thoughtfulness about timing and when we do what we do. And we're going to actually get into some application with these here in a minute. So it'll be cool to see how it plays out. Again, providing support, navigating, empowering, those are things that might come as you're into the relationship a little more, but setting boundaries, of course we have boundaries we have to set because we have some rules, right, that we have to follow. But if we go too hard on that too early, right, it can come off as insensitive, right? Xavier just said it, right? We got to check them if it's getting a little rough, right? But we don't want to go too hard on that when we don't know each other yet, right? So I push that back a little bit, and you see the rest of the expanding possibilities and challenging growth. I've put those a little bit later in the relationship because how can if I show up to you trying to expand your possibilities and we don't even know each other, then am I making this stuff up about how much I believe in you and you could do anything? Well, how do you know? I mean, you know what I mean? Like it could be taken as you're kind of just blowing smoke, right? And then challenging growth. If I don't know you well and I'm saying, oh, come on, you could do better than that. You know, depending on where we are in the relationship, that might be received in a way that we hadn't intended. So just want to throw this out. We're going to, in the following slides, get into application. But just want to ask you for now, before we get into the application, because what we're going to do for the final slides is literally take all 3 points. So being developmental, being trauma-informed, being culturally responsive, and thinking about our timing. We're going to kind of talk about what a youth might say. And I kind of got ahead of myself and shared some of those just now. but we're going to talk through those for the remainder of our training. So just want to pause real quick. Any thoughts on the timing piece and just thinking about how in certain cases, a certain approach or a certain focus might not be good timing, depending on where we are in a relationship? Or challenges you've had?
I don't know, it was really, it resonated with me, the placement of I forget the challenge, the growth, the expect my best and stretch, that sort of thing. That we tell mentors that you have to have the right, the relational right to encourage, to push, to ask a member to stretch themselves a little bit in terms of a project that they might be working on. They have to trust you and know that you know them and care about them before you have the right to expect them to push themselves. And so that's in terms of like.
Oh man, we got all Trisha's goodness except for the last part. All right.
No, that just a lot. Yeah.
I think
was that frozen through that whole thing?
No, we got most of it. You were just saying about the challenging growth and expanding possibilities and how mentors may struggle with that. So I think we got most of it. So that said, let's just jump right in. I've put these together, and these are the last slides to just kind of think about. And I kind of already gave some of these examples, but if we were starting from the beginning of a relationship and kind of looking at how that might play out in a trauma-informed, culturally responsive way, again, start with caring. Do you care about me? Do you care about me when I'm acting out, right? Because it's all roses and butterflies, right? Until we see some funky behavior. We can't make the youth earn our care, right? To where we're feeling real good vibey when they're acting the way we think they should, and then not so much when they're not. We're withholding judgment, not making assumptions about them or their journey because we don't know them. We just met them, right? We want them to, they want us, and we should assume the best about them because we're trauma informed. We know that their behavior, if it's funky, could be rooted in that pain that they've had. And sometimes that's just the way they're saying, hey, I'm hurting, right? We want to be warm, but we don't want to be too warm. We talked about that. We want to obviously be dependent and consistent, and we want to encourage. In the next category of providing support, we got to remember that our version of support might not match theirs. So we start with acceptance and accept them as is. And so I know that, and the reason why I put this up is because I can remember certain clients that I've had over the years who, you come in and you think loving on them and being sweet and caring is what they want. And for some of them, that is traumatic in and of itself to have somebody really expressive and really supportive. So we can't assume that our kind of support is their kind of support. So just really checking in and not assuming that what we think would be helpful is helpful, right? Of course, advocating for them, standing up for them, even when they're acting ways that we or the school might not want them to, we still should be advocating, because remember, there's a lot of folks who don't understand trauma-informed approaches. So even if we are in a situation, for example, where a school or another staff person is aware of some challenging behavior, how can we support the youth in being accountable for that, but also support them in being heard and seen as it relates to maybe how historical experiences may be playing into, or stuff that's going on at home right now is playing into why they're acting that way. Of course, we want to help them navigate, not by telling them what to do, right? But to ask them questions to see, where do you want to go? And then how can we support them in getting information to kind of find their way for themselves? We want to be empowering, where we allow them to, again, ask questions and write their own story, write their own book, rather than us knowing you need to get good grades, you should go to college, and we have all our predetermined ways of what would be a good outcome for them. We want to be gentle with the boundary setting. We talked about that. Of course, we have to set boundaries. We want to make sure that we don't go too hard on what that looks like. And then over into then sharing power. Respecting them, we're allowing them to move beyond feelings of powerless. So when we do share power, we're helping to empower them to say, even though you didn't get choice in this situation, or you don't have choice about what's going on at home, there's still plenty of ways in which you have power in your life. And we want to highlight that for them as much as we can. Again, it's power and it's opportunity to have control, choice, and voice, which we talked about. Include them in decisions. We talked about that already. Collaborating with them on problem solving. Again, let's not adult them where we come in and fix stuff, right? We're giving them an opportunity. Ask them a question instead of giving them the answer. Ask them, what do they think first? And be okay with the silence. If they don't like quick have a response, just give a moment for silence, or maybe give an additional probing question rather than quickly jumping into answers. We want to be collaborative by, again, asking them, what is it they want? Even as a clinician, it is not my job, if I have a client who is in a clinical setting, it is not my job to set for them what they want to do in counseling. It's my job to find out from them, what would they want to do? And then I support them in doing that and give them the information, even if it's not something I think would be best for them. A lot of times, if you just give them the information to process and think through the pros and cons of things, they're going to realize that maybe what they thought they wanted isn't helpful, but we shouldn't be harping on them, telling them those answers. And of course, let them lead. It's their life. They might blow it. I think as adults, we get so concerned that we want to try to keep them from getting into trouble or keep them from falling off or whatever. But we have to let them define their success. And if we recall when we were younger, we didn't get it right all the time, did we? Right? But we're still here. We made it. So we got to be able to be patient with them while they go through that journey. For the expanding possibilities, this is when you start to really get to that point where you've been patient, right? You've given them the opportunity to kind of feel you out and you've found your way. And so this is where like that relationship grows and strengthens. They're going to be more open to you, right? Because you've given them that space and you've given them that respect. And now, you know, they're going to be more likely to seek your answers and ideas and be willing to collaborate even more. Always acknowledging how they chose to do it, especially when it comes to trauma, right? So even if there's some really, really funky behaviors that come with surviving trauma, but folks do what they got to do to make it. So no matter what it is, we got to honor that they did what they had to do to survive, even if it's not behavior we would suggest people engage in. They did what they had to do to get here. And so it's important for us to honor that and make sure they know to honor that, right? Their quote unquote bad choices, which were survival mechanisms, were good in that they got them here. So if they can make it through those challenges that they're either currently in or were in at one time, then we know the possibilities are endless, right? And so helping them to realize, man, look what you've come through. You know, you guys have moved 7 times in 12 months. That's a lot, but you're still here and you found your way. Man, you can do anything. Look at what you've done, right? Because otherwise there's sometimes things that they're looking at as problematic or, you know, things they get down on themselves about. And then the last one is the challenging growth, right? So because we've been expressing care, providing support, sharing power, and expanding possibilities, now we can, you know, get in a little tough love thing where, right, we're like, hey, you could do better. I know you can do better, right? I've seen you do better, right? We want to make sure, though, we don't lower the expectations just because they've had some struggles or because their parents are struggling right now or whatever it is. That doesn't mean that they can't, you know, capture the stars if that's what they want to do. And this piece, you want to kind of vacillate between being gentle and stern. There's times to just let them be where they are and roll. And there are other times where they really do need to be challenged. And you've got to pick that up along the way in the relationship, right? So you kind of get a sense for when you kind of know when you've got a kid who could be doing better, but they're not. You guys know what I'm talking about. And there's other times when they really can't be doing better. So as you've gone along in the relationship, you can kind of know how to vacillate between the two. And again, always just reminding them that whatever they've done to make it so far is worthy of praise, right? Because they're here. They made it even through funky, even through 1 year of bad grades or whatever it was, right? They're still here. They're still trying. They're still doing their thing. Yeah, I saw your point, May, that many youth move. They've shared that your space is consistent and they can rely on. Yeah, yep. And so we can point out all the things when you go through that much change, you start to become an expert at change. And we know in adulthood, one guarantee is change, right? So again, just a way that we can sort of peg that. So final tips and suggestions, so I can leave a little bit of time for conversation at the end. And I know this is a content heavy slide, but this was my catch-all for all the things I wanted to make sure you guys knew about and were thoughtful of. So, and I've thought a lot of this just because this is, if we're living this right, I've probably already said it, right? So we want to make sure that we are always willing to admit we don't know what the heck we're doing sometimes. We don't want to encourage alternative views or things that don't align with the way we would do it, right? We don't want to ever project what we believe on them, even if we totally don't agree. That's not what we're here to do. Our job is not to align and agree on everything, right? Of course, I said this before as well, be aware. Most of us have some historical trauma that we might not have addressed, and make sure that that isn't affecting how you're thinking about things and approaching things. Also, we cannot assume if we got the same story as they did, that their experience is the same as ours. So we want to make sure we're not assuming, right, that our great ideas that helped us are going to help them. We don't want to make assumptions about their experiences, perspectives, knowledge. We want to help them identify and communicate their feelings and emotions. And this goes back to what we talked about last week and what we're not, right? We're not counselors, but we can help support folks in learning how to communicate and express, right? If you don't have one, grab you a feeling chart. That's a good way if folks are struggling to just express, that's a good way to just be able to give them something to sort of latch on to. You can also get creative with expressing through song, colors, drawing. I know folks who say, what color do you feel like today? Or what song are you feeling today? So the feelings chart might not get it. It's not necessarily culture responsive, and it just might not be their thing. So there's a lot of different ways to find out how someone feels. If you know they love sports, then maybe you ask them, if you were in a sports game right now, right? Or is it fourth down and you're down by 20 and there's only 2 minutes left? Or, you know what I mean? Is it early in the game, you blowing them out, you feeling good, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you got to find out what they love and speak their language. And I mentioned to you guys last week, again, we're not therapists, but we can absolutely help them to learn activities. And I know Jennifer and I talked, you guys do a lot of really cool stuff. So supporting them and not only getting more involved in the activities you offer, but learning other crafts and ways to self-regulate, whether it's drawing, music, dance, whatever it is, just helping them discover what works for them is important, because what works for one of us doesn't work for the others. And they need to know that it's their book to write and their discovery process to figure out, what works for them. And then a last couple thoughts is this work is heavy. And I said this before we left last week. I think most people use the term self-care, at least here and there, but let's make sure we're not talking about it only, that we live it, and that's really a lifestyle, especially in the roles that we're in. Remember that no matter the crisis, the core solution is the same. So I get called all the time to do like mentoring work on this specific population and this specific problem. This trauma training, the core trauma training that I do, or just human relationship training that I do, has been the same for like a million years. All 21 years that I am, 45, never mind. Anyway, the point is that the solution is the same. It's always about relationship. Mentoring is about relationship. So all we have to do is just be good at relationship, right? And that just sometimes simply means just being there, being empathetic, being humble, being open, and just being there. Like that is it at the core. And so I just want to challenge you as new challenges arise and a new target population comes up and a new health pandemic or whatever the new thing is going to be, right? We're going to get through this one and another one's going to come. The answers are going to still be the same, guys. And it's about relationship. It's about connection. It's just about being there. So don't get caught up, right, in the technicality of it to where you miss the simplicity of it all. And that's all I have. Again, there's a lot more we could always go into. Maybe we'll have some time in some other trainings, but I wanted to give, we got about 15 minutes for any questions, comments, thoughts on relationship timing, on the boundaries conversation we had last week, on being culturally responsive, any of that stuff.
I guess I got a comment. So it really stuck out when you said mentoring is manufactured, right? I've been in the position for a little while, and after hearing you speak like last week, I realized I've been doing it completely wrong. Right? Like I've had no boundaries, had no self-care. I've gotten like waist deep in it with kids who you've seen over the years and families and situations. I've been successful, right? I mean, I've curbed a lot of different things. Built these relationships. I have kids who have kids now. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Down. So, and that's based off of like authentic relationships built over the years. But and I was in a training this morning with the Mentors Partnership in Southwestern Pennsylvania. Michelle Thomas said hello.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But so my approach now is broad and different. And so now when we go to onboard new mentors, I have a different perspective. So I firmly believe in building that trust in time, that trust in the beginning, through conversation and, you know, some of the work that we do. But I just want to say, like, you're awesome. And I learned a whole lot. Sometimes you got to sit and be quiet and listen because you realize you're doing it wrong. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that, Aaron. And I appreciate your transparency about that. I think, first, again, thank you. And I think because there's a lot of good that can happen even when you do it, quote unquote, the wrong way, the boundaryless way. I think that's what makes it hard, is that the good vibes are all around and you can see good outcomes and all kinds of good stuff happen. The hard part is when the hard part comes, right? Where, Galen, they've told you so much that you're holding water and it's spilling, or they're starting to come to you in a way that you really can't do and be for them what they're asking. That's the part where it gets hard and it's too late then. So that's the whole part about this that's difficult, is that it's not to say that doing it without boundaries that you won't see great things happen, right? And that's what makes it hard, is that, again, good things can happen, but man, when that slope gets slippery, the slope gets slippery, and that's not the time to be trying to figure out whether or not you got the right shoes on or if your equipment is right? So, and ultimately, we hurt them, and we might not be around to see the hurt when we've done so well with relationship building that they almost like need us, like they see us as so much a part of their lives to lose us via end of relationship, you leave the job, the mentoring relationship ends, is traumatic to them. If it's traumatic to them, then we missed it. If they're sad, right, and they're going to miss us, that's cool, right? We did good. But if they're going to lose because we're not in their life anymore, then we missed it. And that's the part that's so hard, Aaron, is that you won't know that until, again, you're in it. So I appreciate the feedback, and I appreciate that you're willing, as good as you've been doing it, right? Because there's a lot of folks who are in that shoes that would say, She don't know what she talking about. I'm good and they good. And I done helped all these people, right? And I want to point out one more thing that you said. You said you haven't been doing self-care. That's the other piece we miss. We care so much about who we serve that we miss ourselves. It's true martyrdom. And I believe that if we are literally looking for a better world, no poverty, no racism, everybody's well, that can't happen and we don't take care of ourselves. And so we have to completely change how we show up to this. And it feels weird because it feels selfish and mean and bitchy and whatever other word you want to use, because you actually were like, I'm going to no on that because I'm going to yes to this. Like the idea that if you see somebody struggling, I'm not talking about like crisis, but you just see them struggling and you always opt for their struggle and not preserve and take care of yourself and fill yourself back up. That's martyrdom, right? And that is not the world we're looking for. So that's the other piece to the boundary thing, is that this work is exhausting when you do it with boundaries. It's damn sure exhausting when you do it without them. And then look at the turnover we have in this field. There's a reason for that. Some of it is just some inherent struggles within the work, but some of it is that we just care so dang on much, we're killing ourselves. And I would rather see us do less, but do more over time than go so hard and then burn out to where we don't even want to see another human, right? Because we've cared so much that we're hurting. So thank you, Erin. I appreciate that. And any other thoughts or questions or feedback, I'm love to hear it.
I got sort of a tough one, I guess. You know, we have a lot of kids in our space that are dealing with various types of trauma. And in some instances, like what you were describing, where you don't want the kid to be re-traumatized, we have instances where a kid their behavior might re-traumatize another kid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we definitely want to be attentive to the kid that is causing the disruption or has the behavioral issue. We want to care for them.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, we want to care for those other kids that are kind of, you know, feeling the impact of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I guess my question is like, you know, with the desire to serve all kids and make this a space that's comfortable for all of them, how do you deal with those instances where there's a kid who's got this ripple effect that basically this individual that I'm speaking about, when they're not here, the other kids are like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad they're not here, you know?
Ooh.
And so I try to say like, no, we want them here. We want them to be a part of our group, you know? And at the same time,
Galen, you always bring the heavy stuff, man. You make me work. She like, if Jennifer's gonna pay you, we're gonna make you work.
It's a tough one, and I don't know if there is necessarily like an answer, but it's something that me and my colleagues are really struggling with.
Well, it depends on where you work and what you guys decide. I'll tell you this, the irony is I run a space for adults, a supportive space for adults. And I literally had to make a move Friday. And it was to ask someone to step back for a minute for this very reason. So I'm in it right now. Couple of things. You gotta either, when you have spaces like this, you gotta know what you do and don't do. And while we want to welcome everybody, it is not helpful to welcome everyone if you are not in position to handle everyone and everyone's stuff. So first I would say it's not ideal to try to be everything to everyone because this, right? So if you are gonna be a space that welcomes most everyone, then you gotta have the resources have to be on deck, so that if you're in situations like that, there are interventions there. Because y'all can't be clinicians, right? So if we're gonna allow certain folks who have that level of struggle in the space, then we got to know what that will mean in order to be able to respond. Or maybe overlapping is, there are times where we might have to pull somebody back for a minute, because if people are that relieved, that's concerning. That's concerning, because we almost start to train folks on how to numb themselves to trauma and still be okay. And we don't want to do that. So I'm not going to be able to give you a full answer, Galen, because it depends on your staff and your rules and all of that. But I will also say, this is why I'm so big on not only us knowing this, but we haven't done a good job of youth understand. We say trauma informed for everybody, but the youth themselves. So the more youth can also understand what this means, then we can also engage them, so that at least if we're all in a space, and sometimes it hurts me that you're here because you're doing your stuff. If I understand trauma informed as your peer, then maybe I don't process your funky the same way I would if I didn't understand that. And then we can leverage that knowledge within the space, so that not only are we learning it for ourselves, or the youth are learning it for themselves, but they're learning it for each other, because we all need to know how to be trauma informed and work with each other when Maria is getting really funky at work. And I have to understand that maybe it's something else that's causing her to show up to this meeting this way, right? So I think there's also room for not just a black or white or a yes or a no there, Galen, but if you all can think about how do you make youth aware of how historical experiences impact how everyone shows up, then they can show up to each other with some empathy, and also maybe not internalize when they see behavior from someone else. So that's my short answer. And Jennifer may have something she wants to add there, but that's my 2 cents for now.
I like that. I really appreciate it, because I think, just in talking with the other kids, I can try to bring a little bit more understanding, like you said, and I do appreciate that.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for the toughie. I can always depend on you.
I know it's we're running close to the to 3:30 Eastern time, so maybe we can have one more question if there is one, and then close out.
The Labor Day hangover is real.
Yeah, and we've covered a lot. We've covered a lot over, I think, 3.5 hours total.
No doubt.
Yeah, well, Elizabeth, I want to thank you so much for facilitating these conversations over these past couple of weeks. I think they've been affirming in a lot of ways, and like thinking about what all of these, our clubhouses are doing well in terms of sharing power and youth choice and voice. I feel like a lot of that really resonated, but you definitely also challenged our own growth and thinking about things that we could, continue to improve. And just really appreciate your facilitation style and your openness and transparency. I think we all got a ton out of these conversations. And I feel like the time always flies by too when you're with us. Like,
you guys are, I swear.
Yeah.
Well, so, thank you, Jennifer. And I just want to remind you guys, like, this is ongoing. Like, you never arrive, right? We can do 20 million trainings, you can change policies and all that. This is human life we're talking about, right? So please give yourselves grace to know that, like, we show up the best we can today. Sometimes it's a resource issue. Sometimes it's a lot of other things that can be limiting. But if you show up every day knowing that you're bringing your empathy and your heart as an organization and as individuals, like, you got to be able to rest and know that. Do your best, right? Learn as you go, and just give yourself grace, because this is a whole human experience, which means it's art, not science, right? And there'll always be space for vacillation, even with one individual. What worked for them yesterday, try that same thing today, and like, they totally don't respond, right? So just be gracious with yourselves. And again, I can't stress enough, please take care of yourselves. Please know the difference between who you are and what you do. This work is not who you are. It adds to a part of your life, but please make sure that your work isn't your life, because that right there really doesn't help anyone. So please take care of yourselves. Thank you for the opportunity, Jennifer. And I hope to see you guys around really soon.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. All right, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care. And before we sign off,
Thank you.
I did want to just extend some well wishes to my guy, whose last day is, I think, Thursday, right, Mai? I think many of you know Mai has been part of this group for, I think, around 6 years, and has just been such a leader at the Clubhouse Network. And we're really going to miss her partnership and having her in this group. But I hope you'll keep in touch, Mai, and I'm sure our paths will cross again too. So
Yes, I know this is
next
the last
role.
time I'm going to see you all.
Goodness.
But yes, it's
It's
been great to see you
Yeah.
all. Yes.
Yeah.
Good luck, Mai, wherever you go and whatever you do.
Thank you. Well, I'll be working at Hennepin County at the Students Opportunity Team. So I'll be placing student interns at various departments. So that'll be
Awesome.
fun. Yes.
Have
Not too
fun.
far, thankfully.
Yes, that's fun.
All
Okay.
right. Take care, all. We'll see you
Take
soon.
care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.